Following the threats against it, Hamas is weakened and might even be folding, while the Israeli Air Force has begun airdropping supplies directly to the Gazan people, and representatives of the United Arab Emirates have begun bringing in equipment to build the waterline of Gaza. A statement by the IDF spokesperson's office said, "We continue bringing aid into Gaza. There is no famine. It's a false campaign." However, many around the world are convinced that the reports of famine in the Gaza Strip are true. This narrative has even worked on senior officials in the United States of America, some of whom are urging Israel to change course and give a gift to the terrorist organization. The increase of aid was supposed to be a central clause in the hostage return agreement, but now Israel is forced to do it unilaterally under international pressure, without the ability to guarantee that the food will not reach Hamas. And speaking of Hamas, the IDF says it destroyed a Hamas tunnel about 500 meters long in the Bet Hanun area, and that the fight against Hamas will continue with full force, while the question remains of whether another war will break out soon in Lebanon. In recent days, Hezbollah operatives have received an exceptional and dramatic order to once again focus their attention on northern Israel. Is Hezbollah looking for trouble with Israel again? After everything that's happened over the last year? It seems incredible to think that they would be so foolish, but the IDF must assume this is the case and prepare accordingly. And speaking of preparations, Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz sent a clear message to Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei this week, saying, "Our long arm will reach Tehran again. Do not threaten, lest you be harmed." And meanwhile, the water crisis in Iran is escalating, and millions are without access to clean, safe drinking water at the height of the summer heat. Last, but certainly not least, the Houthis are also threatening to escalate their attacks on shipping in international waters off the coast of Yemen, whether these ships are doing business with Israel or not. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you all the truth about what is happening in Israel. Increasing humanitarian aid shipments into the Gaza Strip was supposed to be a central clause in the negotiations for ending this war, but now Israel is being forced to take this step unilaterally because of international pressure without getting anything from Hamas in return. It is also impossible to ensure that Hamas will not continue stealing whatever gets sent into the civilian population of Gaza. And meanwhile, Egypt and Qatar want to advance the negotiations and bring resolution to the issues not yet decided as part of the efforts of a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the return of the hostages. However, a political source added that this is not wide-scale pauses or complete cessation of fighting. Down at ground level, many residents of the Gaza Strip are furious at Hamas for its obstinacy in the negotiations with Israel. In addition, the opening of the Rafah crossing is encouraging many Gazans who want to leave. However, there is some hope, as after Israel and the United States claimed that the party preventing progress towards an agreement and torpedoing the negotiations is Hamas, the terrorist organization is beginning to fold and retreat from its maximalist demands. And meanwhile, in Syria, there are signs that the al-Julani regime is under severe pressure and maybe even collapsing following the severe miscalculations surrounding the recent events in Saweda, in the south of Syria. The risk of renewed civil war is high, while external players, including Turkey and Iran, are preparing to move in and take prizes. And next door, in Lebanon, an Israeli airstrike took out Muhammad Haidar Abuad, operations chief of a Radwan battalion of Hezbollah, as well as other senior Hezbollah operatives who were unlikely enough to be with him at that time. The activities of Hezbollah in Lebanon raise a question about whether the organization is organizing for war once again. the Saudi channel Al-Hadat reported that the terrorist organization is preparing for the possibility of escalation with Israel. The preparations include cost-cutting measures, such as freezing funding for university students for the children of the terrorists who fell in battle in past years. And meanwhile, Israel has continued to act against Hezbollah in Lebanon, in the soil of Lebanon in recent months. And finally, the results of an after-action probe of the battle at the Sufa base on October 7, 2023 were published on Sunday. The probe found that at least 50 terrorists attacked the Israeli kibbutz on that day, and the Rapid Response Squad prevented a massacre. Tensions are also flaring this week between Jewish residents of communities in the West Bank and Palestinian villages. So we'll bring you some details about this information. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 661 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region operating under the directives of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran. A moment before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth so that together we can stand by Israel while the lies and the deception against Israel grows around the world. We must stand together with the truth and crush the lies of the Hamas terrorist organization and its supporters. So guys, please help us spread these videos with your friends, with anybody who wants to know what truly is happening in Israel. You can leave a comment, hit the like button, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us spread the truth. The IDF spokesperson's office released statements over the last 24 hours declaring that during their operations over the last 3 months, IDF forces destroyed hundreds of terror infrastructures, including military structures, weapons depots, and enemy firing and observation positions. In addition, in recent days, the forces destroyed a Hamas underground route about 500 meters long in the Bet Hanun area. As was said many times over the last 24 hours and even in the past months, Israel is winning the kinetic battle in the Gaza Strip, but we are losing the information war surrounding narratives about what's happening in this land. This war of narratives between Israel and the Hamas terrorist organization is actually going very badly for our side, for Israel. And this is why I'm always asking you guys to help us share these videos, subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube, and follow us on social media. In Israel, the various public relations arms of the government, the IDF, and the foreign ministry continue and try to minimize the damage from Hamas's hunger campaign in Gaza. This is a campaign that pushed Israel into a difficult corner in the world's public opinion, which leads to pressure on the state and the IDF regarding the continued legitimacy of the war in the Gaza Strip. Pressure has increased on Israel from many directions to end this war before we've achieved our objectives of destroying Hamas and retrieving our hostages. The pressure has even come from within Israel and the American Jewish community. So, what is the truth in Israel? According to our sources at TBN Israel, this past month in Israel, the humanitarian aid organization and the United Nations have increased the collection of aid from the border crossings with Israel, while dozens of community kitchens and local bakeries renewed their activities with the support of international organizations and donor countries. Through the Coordination and Liaison Directorate, in accordance with the directive of the political echelon and as part of the efforts to transfer humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, more than 250 trucks of humanitarian aid from organizations around the world and the United Nations containing many food were brought in the past week via the crossings that were coordinated by Kogat, basically from Israel into Gaza. The IDF spokesperson and the spokesperson of the civil administration today published videos and photos of food distribution inside the Gaza Strip. Israel even gave approval for Jordan and the United Arab Emirates to airdrop food into Gaza, which will apparently take place in the coming days. The IDF further said that 950 United Nations aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip through the Kerem Shalom border crossing, which are supposed to suffice for 2.5 weeks, but the United Nations is refusing to distribute the aid for its own reasons. And following Israeli pressure, the United Nations agreed to distribute the Gaza residents the aid from only dozens of trucks, but the United Nations continued to regularly issue statements condemning Israel for the bad situation in the Gaza Strip. This situation worsens the problem in Gaza and creates a bottleneck that disrupts the course of distribution. Another fact in all of this is the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Hamas knows that, and they use pictures of severely malnourished children with captions saying they are starving in Gaza due to the Israeli cruelty. These pictures with these captions get picked up by news agencies all over the world, adding to the pressure against Israel. However, a closer look at these pictures reveal that many of them are AI generated, or they are pictures of children in Yemen or Syria taken years and sometimes even decades ago. But major news agencies and media outlets publish these pictures anyway without bothering to check if they're giving a truthful picture of the events on the ground. In this way, they serve the Hamas agenda and damage Israel's position. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describes this issue in a statement on Sunday, in which he declared that Israel is depicted as if we are conducting a starvation campaign in the Gaza Strip. What a loathsome lie. There is no policy of starvation in the Gaza Strip, and there is no famine in Gaza. This is a battle that we are fighting. Even at this very moment, we allow the humanitarian aid throughout this war. Otherwise, there would be no Gazans. What prevented the entry of humanitarian aid is Hamas, the terrorist organization. Again, a reversal of the truth of what's happening on the ground. Hamas loots the humanitarian aid and then accuses Israel of not supplying the aid to the people. This is according to the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And amidst all of this diplomatic back and forth, it is important to understand that as part of the negotiations over the end of this war, Hamas demands a return to the humanitarian aid mechanism within the United Nations framework. At the same time, the new mechanism for distributing aid, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, is encountering opposition from the United Nations and from international organizations. Hamas's insistence and the United Nations support are not surprising, as both benefit from the previous agreement. Let me explain. It is important to know that humanitarian aid has been provided to the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, in Judea and Samaria, and in East Jerusalem for more than 2 decades, mainly through the United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The funding for this mostly comes from European governments before it is transferred to the United Nations agencies and to international and local organizations that ostensibly carry out humanitarian projects on the ground. When I say funding, I'm talking about enormous sums. From 2019 to September 2023, about $3.3 billion were transferred in this framework, and a similar amount entered in 2024 alone. It is reasonable to assume that part of the aid's money that entered over the years was diverted to building Gaza as a terrorist base, especially when one understands who the organizations are and with whom they cooperated. Part of UNRWA's activity, whose ties with Hamas are clear, also take place with another United Nations organization that deals with humanitarian aid and its framework. So beyond the terror ties, OCHA and the organizations constitute a central part of the delegitimization apparatus against Israel. The mechanism is composed of organizations hostile to Israel, including those that deny its right to exist, organizations that justify the October 7th massacre, and organizations that Israel has designated as terrorist groups. Under the guise of human rights organizations and humanitarian aid, they receive funding for projects that include writing delegitimization reports on Israel, allegations of crimes against humanity, lawfare activity at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and more. Many false reports regarding the war in Gaza, and amongst them the lie of starvation and of genocide, which are quoted by decision makers around the world, are fed by the OCHA data and organizations involved in slandering Israel and attempting to impose sanctions, including an arms embargo against the Jewish state. The United Nations OCHA, the organizations and the United Nations agency, many whose employees stayed in Gaza for extended periods and witnessed its turning into a terror base, are not worthy of continuing to operate in this region. One may hope that the foreign minister's directive to freeze the residence visa for the OCHA's regional head is only a first step. However, it is undeniable that the international pressure on Israel is increasing all over the world. On Saturday evening, the IDF announced that it would begin to airdrop humanitarian aid into Gaza in order to counter claims that Israel is starving the Gaza civilian population and that the humanitarian aid entering via the mechanism that Israel established does not meet the Gaza's needs. The campaign that Hamas ran on this issue succeeded greatly, and the world is shocked by the pictures and videos that the terrorist organization is distributing. Consequently, there was a change in the decision of the political echelon, and now Jordan and the United Arab Emirates are also taking an active part in the efforts. The IDF further claimed that Hamas has an interest in worsening the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, and does so by creating chaos at distribution centers and attacking civilians and American aid vehicles. Therefore, the IDF announced on Saturday night that it began a series of actions to improve the humanitarian response in the Gaza Strip against the background of the escalating crisis and claims of famine. Under the direction of the political echelon, the Air Force airdropped 7 pallets of aid containing flour, sugar, and canned food supplied by international organizations. This is the first Israeli airdrop in the Gaza Strip. Until now, aid had been airdropped only by various countries, but not by Israel directly. The army also announced that humanitarian corridors would be designated to allow safe movement of United Nations convoys and aid organizations to bring food and medicine to the population. The statement further clarified that the IDF is prepared for humanitarian pauses in areas with population concentrations and will continue to operate clear and deepen the thwarting of infrastructure and other terrorist activities in these areas where the IDF operates. Immediately after the IDF's announcement, it became known that humanitarian pauses were decided to begin already on Monday morning, and reports in Egyptian media indicated that trucks carrying humanitarian aid were already heading into the Gaza Strip. In parallel, the IDF announced that in accordance with the decision of the political echelon, the IDF, via Kogat, and in cooperation with the Israeli Electric Corporation, connected the Kela power line for the operation of the southern desalination facility, which is expected to supply about 20,000 cubic meters of water every day to the people of Gaza, instead of 2,000 cubic meters that were supplied until now, in order to provide for about 900,000 Gazan residents. The statement continued by saying that the IDF emphasizes that there is no starvation in Gaza. This is a false campaign by Hamas, the terrorist organization. Responsibility for distributing the food to the population in Gaza lies with the United Nations and international aid organizations, and it is expected of the United Nations and the international organizations to improve the effectiveness of aid distribution and to ensure that the aid does not reach Hamas. The IDF emphasizes that there is no halt to the fighting. We will continue to fight in the Gaza Strip for the return of all the hostages and the defeat of the Hamas terrorist organization above and below the ground. Just in the past week, more than 258 trucks were unloaded, joining hundreds of trucks waiting at the crossings from Israel to Gaza for collection by the United Nations and international organizations. In addition, about 600 trucks were collected by the United Nations and the international organizations and were distributed throughout the Gaza Strip. The IDF via COGAT will continue to coordinate with the humanitarian aid organizations the collection of the contents of the hundreds of trucks that were not yet collected. As has been pointed out many times over the last 22 months, another strange thing about all of this is that no other army in the world during war against a terrorist organization that seeks to destroy it should at the same time be required to provide food for the civilian population of the other side. But here, this is what's happening in Israel, and the IDF noted on Monday morning that the pauses will begin in areas where the IDF is not operating, including in El Mawasi, Deir el-Balach, the Gaza City, every day until further notice. The statement added that this decision was coordinated with the United Nations and international organizations after discussions on this matter. In addition, permanently secured routes were defined from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., which will allow safe movement of United Nations convoys and aid organizations for bringing in and distributing food and medicines to the population throughout the Gaza Strip. The IDF said it will continue to support the humanitarian efforts on the ground alongside the continuing maneuver and offensive activities against the terrorist organizations in Gaza. They wrote to the Gazan people that for your safety, do not return to the areas marked in red on the maps. Now, that's a pretty complete picture of what's happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip. So let's switch our focus slightly to look at diplomatic developments. The Saudi-based El Arabiya media portal reported on Sunday that the Hamas terrorist organization informed the mediators that it is interested in resolving the issues stuck in the negotiations and expressed willingness to show flexibility regarding previous demands. The report further claimed that international pressure may contribute to the renewal of negotiations this week. Let us recall that last Friday, United States President Donald Trump addressed the breakdown of the negotiations for a hostage deal with Hamas and sounded as resolute as he has not sounded in a long time on this matter. He firmly asserted that Hamas does not want to make a deal and laid the blame on the breakdown of the contacts at the feet of the Gaza terrorist organization. This statement by Trump came after the White House envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, announced the return of the American delegation from Qatar for consultations following the return of the Israeli team. In his remarks, he also attacked Hamas and said that its response to the latest proposal shows that it is not interested in reaching an agreement on the release of the hostages and a ceasefire in Gaza. Specifically, he declared that we decided to bring our delegation back from Doha, Qatar for consultations following Hamas's latest response, which clearly shows an unwillingness to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Despite the many efforts of the mediators, it appears that Hamas is not acting in good faith. Now, we will consider alternative options to bring hostages home and to try and create a more stable environment for the residents of the Gaza Strip. It is a shame that Hamas acted in this selfish way. We are determined to seek an end to this conflict and lasting peace in the Gaza Strip. To make a comment of my own about all of this, I believe Hamas will release the hostages only when Israel forces it to release them, but we have not yet found the best way to do that. The military pressure is not being applied at full strength, and our soldiers' hands are rather tied. We are bringing in humanitarian aid that allows Hamas to buy time and delay their own inevitable downfall. In my assessment, Israel should declare that it is no longer willing to conduct negotiations in this matter and do two things in parallel. First, promote a full force the separation of the Gazan population from Hamas by means of the humanitarian areas in a humanitarian city. This will also bring control over the humanitarian aid back to the people of Gaza, so that it does not reach the Hamas terrorists. Second, since according to assessments, some of the hostages' locations are known, Israel should conduct local negotiations with the holders of the hostages and not with the Hamas headquarters in Qatar or other places that are not in the Gaza Strip. And speaking of personal opinions, what are the Gazan population saying about this? Many are furious at Hamas, and over the weekend we reported that negotiations for a deal did not go well, and as usual, Hamas is piling on obstacles and outrageous demands to the negotiations. This prompted Gazan lawyer Muammen El-Natur to tell Hamas by way of an interviewer, "Everything collapsed. What are you coming back to rule over? You'll come back and bring funding from abroad to build tunnels and absurd wars, and to do another October 7th, to bring women, children, and civilians to their death, or to negotiate over them for what?" Another Gazan woman also directed a message to Hamas' negotiating team saying, "You sit there in comfort and your belly is 10 meters ahead of you, and I live here in humiliation. How do you order me to brace myself?" This is not one or two videos, but dozens and perhaps hundreds of videos just from recent days of Gazans angry at the obstinate Hamas that are staying outside of the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, it was also reported on an accepted opening of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, and videos already began to appear of trucks gathering on the Egyptian side. Many Gazans want to leave the Gaza Strip, and the opening of the crossing encourages them. One resident said in a video, "We will reach the gates of the Rafah border crossing, God willing, as victors. We are going to flee Gaza." Meanwhile, in the last 24 hours, there were also videos of crowds of Gazans pouncing on aid packages that were dropped from the air by the IDF and also from planes of the Arab Emirates. And meanwhile, the looting of the trucks entering through the crossings continues. Gazans who already know the routes of the trucks entering through the Zikim checkpoint wait for them and then loot them. It is unclear how many of them eventually reach their destination. Meals that arrived in packages from Jordan are sold in the Gazan market for hundreds of shekels, and Strip residents are frustrated that the aid does not reach them, with one resident saying, "We didn't receive anything from the planes or the trucks," and a father of 6 from Bet Lachia added, "I walked 4 kilometers without knowing if I'll get flour." Gaza is of course a very hard place to live in, but against Hamas's fabricated campaign that is claiming that Israel is starving the Gaza people, let us remind everybody that restaurants are still open across the Gaza Strip, and one can also find signs of affluence within the chaos. In front of the cameras, Hamas talks about suffering, but behind the scenes, it continues to cause it. Even in Gaza, there are those who no longer buy Hamas's story and simply want to flee the Gaza Strip. So, to sum everything up, what will Israel do right now? Last night, Israel's goal is increasing the aid to the Gazans, and it also became clear. More than a double of the number of the trucks enter the Gaza Strip, so that about 150 trucks entered every day. An IDF statement on Sunday evening said there are close to 800 aid trucks waiting to enter from the Keren Shalom crossing in Israel, and they are proof of the world's hypocrisy and the United Nations behavior, which within 12 hours flipped from opposition to bringing in the trucks to cooperation after we airdropped food to Gaza. This is according to the IDF statement. The new Israeli move is so large that even the renewal of electricity supply to the southern desalination facility of Deir el-Balach was approved by Netanyahu over the weekend in a way that will provide about 200,000 cubic meters of water every day to the Gazan population, living mainly in the center of the Gaza Strip. Israel also plans to increase the amount of fuel entering the Gaza Strip every week to about 400,000 liters and to reach an unprecedented tonnage of food in a large scale unilaterally without any deal with Hamas. If in the past 2 months, according to the IDF, about 100,000 tons of food entered the Gaza Strip, then, in recent days, since the hasty Israeli decision under global pressure to increase the aid to the Gaza Strip, the number has risen to about 20,000 tons of food every week. The problem is that all of these humanitarian benefits were supposed to be part of a deal to release our hostages, and now Hamas is receiving them without agreeing to anything. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth of what's happening in Israel. So help us let the world know what is happening in this region. If you want to do that, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, hit the like button, and share the truth from Israel. Now, we're switching our focus to the far threats from Iran. On Sunday, Defense Minister Israel Katz and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, together with the Air Force Commander Tomer Bar, visited the Ramon Air Force Base in Israel's Negev Desert. During his remarks, Katz praised the pilots of Israel, saying, "I came here today to say thank you for the amazing work you did in Operation Rising Lion when you opened the skies to Tehran and struck again and again at the head of the Iranian octopus, removing annihilation threats from the state of Israel." Katz then turned in his speech to Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei with a direct threat, saying, "I want to deliver a clear message from here to the director Khamenei. If you continue to threaten Israel, our long arm will reach Tehran again with even greater force, and this time also to you personally. Do not threaten lest you be harmed." And last Friday, Khamenei was quoted by the news agencies as admitting that Israel had managed to eliminate several senior IRGC commanders and nuclear scientists during the campaign, but insisted that this had not seriously weakened the regime that rules in Tehran. He went so far to say that the loss of military commanders and nuclear scientists is very heavy for this nation, but the foolish, short-sighted enemy did not achieve its obstacle. He went so far to say that the loss of military commanders and nuclear scientists is heavy for the nation, but the foolish, short-sighted enemy did not achieve its objective, referring to Israel, of course. He even said that the Islamic revolutionaries' military and scientific progress will soon advance faster than before towards lofty horizons. He also called on Iran's military commanders to equip the country more and more with tools to maintain national security and independence, and called for accelerating the country's scientific and technological progress in all sectors. On the one hand, you can say that this man is simply giving his supporters a pep talk, but you could also say that he's delusional and he's either getting really bad advice from his subordinates, or else he himself has completely lost touch with reality. Maybe it's both. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. In any case, Khamenei's speech and Katz's threat come against the backdrop of a water crisis and a severe drought in Iran. The country's energy and infrastructure minister, Ali Abdul Maleki, noted recently that the state lacks the tools and the resources to meet the growing demand for water, and imposed harsher limits on the daily supply for every citizen. In a rare expression of compassion for the ordinary citizens of Iran that this regime usually threats with dismissive contempt, Maleki candidly said, "I apologize to the Iranian people for the drop in water pressure in certain areas. We have no water and we have no choice." That is a good summation of the situation, but let's take a closer look at some of the reports coming out of Iran, where the wider crisis is becoming an emergency right now. The country's reservoirs have been depleted by at least 14% in recent weeks, and anger in the streets is evident as more and more Iranians lose access to water and also to electricity. According to reports by both local and international media outlets, this crisis stems from a variety of factors, some of which are the regime that has little control over these issues, but many of them it probably could have managed better if it had spent less time and less money building ballistic missiles and supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen. President Masoud Pezeshkian himself has warned that the water crisis is more severe than expected, and immediate decisions are required. But residents are already losing patience as electricity long ago became a luxury, with widespread power outages that are measured daily across the country. The authorities, in a desperate attempt to provide an immediate solution to the crisis, began installing machines that sell water for filling jerrycans. All this is happening as Iran agrees to renew nuclear talks with Europe, where they threaten Tehran with reimposing snapback sanctions if it does not reach new understandings around the nuclear issue. Iran's leadership understands the internal pressure, the risk to the regime's stability, and will now be required to make tough decisions regarding the negotiations as well. But incredibly, behind everyone's back, it appears that Iran continues to produce extreme Islamist ideological terror for the world. US Senator Jim Risch, who is the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, told Fox News on Sunday that Iranian activity on the African continent poses a risk to the United States' national security. Risch and several experts have warned that Iran is purchasing uranium in Niger, supplying drones to Sudan in violation of the United Nations arms embargo, and advancing Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism across the continent. Risch added that the long arm of Iranian terror stretches across the globe, including in Africa. Iran is an enemy of freedom everywhere and a threat to the United States' national security. Our partners in Africa must exercise caution before cooperating with this dangerous authoritarian regime. According to experts cited by Fox News, Niger may now be prepared to sell more uranium to Iran. Until recently, uranium in the country was mined mainly by French companies like Orano. But Niger's military leaders, who seized power in 2023 in a coup, announced the cancellation of mining licenses and nationalization of the operations. Reports say that Iran is interested in mining uranium itself in Niger, especially in the Imoranen area, where the ground contains about 200,000 tons of the metal. It should be noted that Iran also mines uranium on its own soil and processes it into the same yellow cake domestically. And furthermore, in a move perceived as a tilt towards Russia and Iran, Niger last year canceled an agreement with the Biden administration, a step that led to the closure of the 2 US military bases used for counter-terrorism operation in that place. Bahnam bin Talbu, a senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense for Democracies (FDD), told Fox News on Sunday that in Niger, French media covering the continent reported on a secret deal between Iran and Niger to trade uranium oxide for drones or energy. The Islamic Republic is an opportunistic actor both in the Middle East and beyond. Talbau added in the interview that another area for Iranian activity is Sudan, where according to an official report by the United States Africa Command, Iran supplied drones to Sudan's army forces, which used them to seize control of the capital, Khartoum, and the presidential palace there. Iran's strategy in Africa includes 3 components: First, providing training and material support to extremist groups to attack Christian and pro-Western communities and export global terror. Second, radicalizing Shiite and Sunni communities against the West and Iran's rivals in the Arab world via cultural and academic centers in more than 30 African countries. One prominent example is Nigeria, where Iran worked to convert Sunni Muslims to Shiaism and established a local Shiite community tightly linked to Tehran. Third, deepening diplomatic and economic cooperation with African governments and businesses and organizations to circumvent sanctions and gain diplomatic support at the United Nations from the nuclear program to investment in proxy forces that threaten Israel. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the whole truth about what the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran is up to. Mainly, they're up to running their own country and making the people who live there miserable, while also stirring up problems for other countries, especially in the Middle East. Radical Islamic regimes and organizations continue to try to take over the world and to destroy Israel and the West. That's why we need you. So guys, together, let's stand against the lies. I call on you to stand with Israel against the lies that are spread around the world. If you want to help us stand with Israel, we started a campaign. So you can go to tbn.org/standwithisrael and help us create more videos, share the truth of what's happening in the land. Again, that's tbn.org/standwithisrael. And on the way, as you do it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And guys, I want to encourage you to pray for the situation. This is a spiritual war, and we need to unite in prayer. And we need to share the truth so that everybody around the world will know what's happening in Israel, in Gaza, in the situation, and will know how to pray. When we pray, let's pray personally. Let's find an IDF soldier to pray for them. Let's pray for a family that has a hostage in the Gaza Strip. Let's pray for somebody that is affected by all these terrorist organizations in this region. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.